Look, if a new CEO takes over a Fortune 500 company, and within a single year, 25% of the top engineers just pack up their desks and walk out the door.
Yeah, you don't just ask a few questions about office morale at that point.
Right, exactly. You assume a fundamental systemic failure is occurring. You assume the core product is about to radically change.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when an institution starts hemorrhaging its most experienced human capital, it is the brightest flashing red light on any operational dashboard you could possibly have.
It's the ultimate metric of distress.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you cannot simply swap out decades of specialized institutional memory overnight without completely altering the functional mechanics of what that organization actually does on a day-to-day basis.
But today, we are not looking at a corporate balance sheet or, a Silicon Valley tech startup. We are auditing the United States Department of Justice.
Right.
And the flashing red lights we are about to unpack are coming directly from a highly contentious congressional budget hearing. Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive.
And we do need to set the table right away here.
Yes, absolutely. Before we dive into the weeds, we have to note up front, you are about to hear an incredibly fiery, deeply partisan breakdown of government operations.
Deeply partisan.
We are looking at a transcript where Senator Chris Van Hollen aggressively questions Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. And crucially, Blanche formerly served as Donald Trump's personal attorney.
Which is a dynamic you cannot ignore in this context.
Right. And the accusations in this document are severe. So we need to make it crystal clear. We aren't here to verify these claims or take a political side.
Not at all.
Neither of us is endorsing these viewpoints. Our sole mission today is to impartially map out the architecture of the argument Senator Van Hollen is building and to explain the underlying legal and government mechanisms at play.
And the architecture of this argument is fascinating. I mean, Van Hollen doesn't just throw isolated grievances at the wall here.
No, it's very methodical.
Exactly. He methodically constructs a cumulative case. He begins with the physical environment of the department. He scales up to massive financial allocations, pushes into international constitutional law, and then
he just deliberately brings it all crashing down into a highly specific, deeply unsettling personal accusation at the end.
Right. It's quite a structural buildup.
So let's start with that physical environment.
Yeah.
Because to understand the specific actions of the Department of Justice that Van Hollen is attacking, we first have to look at the atmosphere he describes.
The visual branding, essentially.
Yeah. He starts with a massive visual shift at the DOJ headquarters in Washington. The senator notes that huge banners featuring Donald Trump's face have been hung from both sides of the main Justice Building.
Oh.
And he argues this is not just decoration, right? He claims this serves as a daily visual mandate to every single person walking through those doors, reminding them exactly what the administration wants them to do.
Well, and by starting here, Van Hollen is making a psychological argument before he even touches the actual budget number.
Right.
He is arguing that the physical space of the Justice Department has been branded. Because historically, I mean, the DOJ goes to great lengths to project an aura of blind, impartial justice.
Lady Justice with the blindfold.
Exactly. So by claiming the building itself now bears the face of a single political figure, the senator is establishing the premise that personal loyalty has replaced institutional independence.
And the cost of that alleged shift in loyalty is just staggering. I mean, look at the metrics here. The transcript claims the DOJ lost over 8,500 staff last year.
Just massive turnover.
Van Hollen points out that this equates to nearly 1/4 of its lawyers. 1 in 4.
Yeah, that is a huge chunk of human capital.
Consider the sheer volume of institutional memory lost when 8,500 professionals walk out. We are talking about decades of accrued knowledge regarding complex federal statutes, multi-year investigations, established legal precedents.
You don't just recover from that in a quarter.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
But what I find even more concerning in this transcript is how they are allegedly filling those empty desks.
All right, the hiring practices.
Yeah. To fill this void, the DOJ is supposedly offering $25,000 taxpayer-funded signing bonuses to hire prosecutors with absolutely no prior legal experience.
$25,000 for no experience.
Right. The department is actively seeking applicants whose primary qualification is a personal pledge of support to the president. And add to that, Van Hollen highlights that acting AG Todd Blanche has publicly claimed there is a, quote, ton of evidence that the 2020 election was rigged.
Which sets the tone from the very top down.
Exactly. So taking all of this together, I mean, how does stripping away veteran lawyers and replacing them with inexperienced loyalists actually change the legal machinery.
Well, think of career professionals as the load-bearing walls of a government agency.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because a functioning legal institution relies on rigorous debate, a deep understanding of precedent, and crucially, a willingness to tell the executive branch when an action is unlawful.
Right, somebody has to be able to say no.
Precisely. So when you remove those load-bearing walls, when you replace independent experts with individuals whose sole qualification is ideological alignment and who, frankly, require a $25,000 bonus to take a job they have no experience for.
You remove the structure that resists political pressure.
Exactly. Van Hollen is arguing that you are no longer operating a traditional Justice Department. You are operating a political apparatus. This creates a closed-loop environment where political loyalty completely supersedes legal expertise.
So if you successfully remove those load-bearing walls, the next logical question is, what kind of structure do you build in the empty space?
Right. What's the new operating model?
And that brings us to the operational phase of Van Hollen's argument. He outlines what he describes as a two-tiered reward and punish paradigm.
Which is very characteristic of a highly politicized environment.
Let's look at the reward side of the ledger first. Van Hollen accuses Blanche of creating a $1.8 billion, and that is billion, with a B taxpayer-funded slush fund to dole out to the president's supporters.
A $1.8 billion slush fund.
Yes. And the transcript specifically notes this includes individuals who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. He emphasizes that this financial reward followed the pardoning of those January 6th rioters and the firing of more than a dozen DOJ lawyers who had actually been prosecuting those specific cases.
It's a complete inversion of the department's standard function.
But I have to stop here and push back on the mechanics of this because, look, we are talking about a congressional budget hearing.
Right.
The acting AG is sitting in front of a committee asking for money. How does a department functionally divert $1.8 billion into a slush fund without Congress immediately shutting it down? I mean, is Van Hollen highlighting some massive loophole in how the government spends our money?
That is a critical question about the mechanics of executive power. Because when Congress passes a budget, they don't just hand the executive branch a giant blank check.
Right. It's highly itemized.
Exactly. They appropriate funds into very specific buckets with strict legislative intent. So this money is for anti-terrorism, this money is for civil rights enforcement, and so on.
The guardrails are supposed to be built in.
They are. However, the executive branch does possess limited statutory mechanisms to reprogram funds or move money around for unexpected operational emergencies.
Like a natural disaster or something.
Right. But Van Hollen is alleging an abuse of those reprogramming mechanisms on a massive, unprecedented scale. He's arguing the administration is treating those highly restricted congressional buckets as a single, liquid account, completely bypassing the intended legislative oversight to pay out political allies.
Wow. So he's calling them out on their own turf.
Exactly. By confronting Blanche with this at a budget hearing, the senator is highlighting the audacity of the request. He is essentially saying, you are asking the legislative branch to replenish the bank accounts that you have already pillaged for political favors.
Which makes the punish side of the paradigm even more severe. Because if you are willing to bypass Congress to fund your allies, the next logical step is bypassing the courts to punish your critics.
The other side of the coin.
Yeah. Van Hollen alleges that resources are being drastically misspent on vindictive political prosecutions. He cites cases against figures like former FBI Director James Comey.
Right.
And he notes that the department couldn't even find a single career lawyer willing to bring the first case against Comey, causing lawyers to resign rather than participate in what Van Hollen called a charade.
Which goes right back to the turnover metric we discussed earlier.
Exactly. He also references criminal charges brought against journalists simply doing their jobs in Minneapolis, and he brings up something called the seashell case. Now, the transcript doesn't really dive into the evidentiary weeds of what the seashell case actually is.
It doesn't, no.
Yeah.
But Van Hollen is using the seashell case alongside the Comey prosecution and the targeting of journalists as structural shorthand for a prosecution that lacks merit.
Okay, got it.
He is describing a scenario where the machinery of justice is forced into motion without underlying evidence. The mechanism he is highlighting is the coercion of the staff.
Forcing their hand.
Right. Forcing career prosecutors to pursue cases so baseless that they would rather resign and forfeit their careers than sign their names to the legal filings. It demonstrates a complete inversion of the prosecutorial model.
And what is truly staggering here is the geographical and jurisdictional breadth of this alleged weaponization. I mean, if this interference were just contained to high-profile political figures in Washington, D.C., like James Comey, it would still be a massive constitutional crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
But Van Hollen goes much further. He claims this interference is bleeding into local municipalities, immigration courts, and even international war zones.
The scope expands dramatically here. I mean, he is intentionally pulling the lens back to show that no sector of the government is immune from this new operational culture.
Let's look at the localized impact first. According to the transcript, immigration judges are allegedly being fired outright simply for rendering decisions that the administration dislikes.
It's just firing the umpires because you don't like the call.
Literally.
Yeah.
And then the senator details a deeply disturbing local law enforcement incident. He brings up a case where Department of Homeland Security agents shot and killed someone named Renee Good.
Right.
And according to Van Hollen, instead of holding those federal agents accountable for the shooting, members of the administration publicly labeled both the deceased, Renee Good, and an individual named Alex Prey as domestic terrorists.
Wow.
And then it gets worse. The DOJ allegedly ordered a criminal investigation into Renee Good's surviving partner. Van Hollen notes that hardworking professional attorneys resign rather than engage in what they saw as a horrifying abuse of power.
Look, this is where the abstract concept of a punish paradigm becomes devastatingly human.
Yeah, it's not just balance sheets anymore.
No. Functionally, it demonstrates the machinery of the state being turned against the grieving partner of someone who was just killed by that same state, solely to provide protective cover for the agents involved. It shows the complete breakdown of internal accountability.
And from the streets of a local municipality, Van Hollen then snaps the lens all the way out to an international conflict.
A huge jump.
Yeah. He accuses the DOJ of flat-out refusing to share with Congress the legal justification for what he calls a blatantly illegal war in Iran, which he states was started by the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right.
Specifically, he mentions they are hiding memos from the Office of Legal Counsel. Now, for those of you listening who are not steeped in federal bureaucracy, what exactly is the Office of Legal Counsel, and why does hiding their memo matter so much in this context?
Well, the Office of Legal Counsel, or the OLC, is arguably the most powerful office you've never heard of.
Interesting.
Yeah, they are essentially the Supreme Court of the executive branch.
The Supreme Court of the executive branch, okay.
Right. When the president wants to know if a drone strike, a domestic surveillance program, or a military intervention is legal, they ask the OLC, and the OLC issues a memo, and that memo becomes the binding legal interpretation for the entire executive branch.
So it's basically the green light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It provides the legal shield for the military and the president to act. So, by refusing to share that memo with Congress, the DOJ is denying the legislative branch the ability to review the legal foundation of a war. It is the ultimate circumvention of constitutional checks and balances.
So by stacking these examples from local journalists in Minneapolis to a shooting victim's partner to the firing of immigration judges, all the way to shielding the legal justification for an international conflict in Iran, Van Hollen is trying to demonstrate that the very concept of independent review has been eradicated.
Yes.
He is showing that there is no firewall left anywhere in the system.
That is the exact structural argument. Whether you are a local citizen caught in a tragic incident, a journalist doing your job, or a member of Congress asking about war powers, the DOJ's response is identical.
Which is what?
Aggressive protection of the administration's interests and punitive action against anyone questioning them.
Which brings us to the climax of the senator's questioning. And this is fascinating. After laying out these massive systemic allegations of billion-dollar slush funds and international constitutional crises, you would think he would end on a grand, sweeping note about democracy.
You'd expect a macro-level closing statement.
Right. Instead, Van Hollen suddenly narrows his focus to a highly specific, incredibly personal conflict of interest regarding Todd Blanche's daily calendar. He brings up the survivors of the heinous crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein.
It is a jarring rhetorical shift, honestly. But strategically, it is probably the most important moment in the hearing.
Yeah, listen to the setup. Van Hollen points out that at the exact moment this budget hearing is taking place, Epstein survivors are gathered in New York City conducting a 24-hour public reading of the Epstein files. They are literally reading excerpts from their own FBI 302 reports to document the abuses they endured. Now, for context, an FBI 302 is the official form the Bureau uses to summarize an interview.
This is the official record.
Exactly. For a survivor, having their 302 read into the public record is the ultimate undeniable documentation of their trauma. It is an indelible footprint of the crime. And Van Hollen notes that these survivors had actively tried to meet with acting AG Blanche to share their stories.
And what happened?
Instead of meeting with the victims, Blanche allegedly spent 2 full days interviewing Epstein's convicted associate, Ghislaine Maxwell.
2 full days.
And to twist the knife, Van Hollen claims that shortly after this intensive 2-day interview, Maxwell was moved to a lower security prison camp with, quote, special perks.
Unbelievable.
Think about the sheer optical weight of that juxtaposition. You have victims literally broadcasting their FBI interviews into the street because they cannot get a meeting with the nation's top law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, that same officer is spending 48 hours with the convicted perpetrator's top associate, resulting in a more comfortable prison cell for the abuser.
This is a striking image.
So, in a hearing filled with billion-dollar numbers and wars, why does Van Hollen anchor his entire closing argument on this one specific detail?
Because it is the ultimate proof of concept for everything else he has alleged.
The micro proving the macro?
Precisely.
Yeah.
A spreadsheet of budget numbers or debate over OLC memos can feel abstract to the average person. But this detail operates on a visceral, emotional level.
You don't need a law degree to understand that dynamic.
No, you don't. If we look at the overarching narrative Van Hollen has built, the hostile takeover of the justice system, the replacement of independent lawyers with loyalists, the slush funds, this Maxwell detail perfectly encapsulates the new operational reality.
Right.
It portrays Todd Blanche not as an objective arbiter of justice, not as someone balancing the scales for the American people, but as a deeply embedded insider fixing problems for a select few. By juxtaposing the victims, reading their trauma into the public record against the acting attorney general, granting private audiences and prison perks to a high-profile associate, Van Hollen is arguing that the DOJ has fundamentally abandoned the vulnerable.
It's an accusation of total institutional betrayal.
It is. It shows a department actively managing the liabilities of the powerful while literally locking the victims out.
It is just a devastating way to corner an official at a budget hearing. When we pull all of these threads together, Senator Van Hollen's entire deep dive into the DOJ really boils down to the extreme tension between two vastly different definitions of the Attorney General's role.
The core conflict of the department.
Right. Is the acting AG the people's lawyer, someone whose sole duty is to blindly defend the rule of law and impartially execute justice? Or, as the senator aggressively claims throughout this entire transcript, is Todd Blanche operating strictly as the president's personal lawyer?
Leveraging the vast power, the structural authority, and the taxpayer budget of the state to please one man, no matter the cost to the institution. And every single piece of evidence introduced, the giant banners on the headquarters, the ideological hiring bonuses, the redirection of appropriated funds to political supporters, the targeted prosecutions, the shielding of war memos, and finally, the private meetings with Ghislaine Maxwell.
It's all connected.
Right. It is meticulously stacked to prove that the transformation from people's lawyer to personal fixer is complete.
We want to reiterate one last time before we go. This has been an exploration of the structural logic and the specific claims made by Senator Van Hollen in this congressional transcript.
Just analyzing the arguments presented.
Our goal is to help you understand the anatomy of the arguments shaping the highest levels of government so you can evaluate the mechanics of these political battles critically. But I do want to leave you with one final, quiet, but frankly terrifying detail that was buried right in the middle of Van Hollen's rapid-fire questioning.
It's easy to miss, but it's crucial.
It's something to mull over as you go about your day. When talking about those 8,500 veteran lawyers fleeing the department, Van Hollen casually mentions a specific reason for some of those departures.
Yeah.
He states that, quote, others in the department have been fired for telling the truth to the courts.
Just let that sink in.
I want you to deeply consider the functional mechanics of that specific phrasing. If we circle back to our opening thought, the idea of removing the load-bearing walls of a cornerstone institution, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question.
Right.
Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, and regardless of which administration holds power, what happens to the very foundation of the American legal system if officers of the court face termination simply for providing truthful information to a judge?
If the bedrock of the justice system, the truth itself, becomes a fireable offense,
Exactly. What exactly is left holding the building up? Think about it. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.